You're listening to the Rural Press Club of Queensland's Lunch Series podcast.
Our moderator today needs no introduction and is a firm friend of the Rural Press Club. Craig Zonca, ABC weatherman and host of ABC Breakfast Radio. To our two panel speakers, firstly to David McNamee. Lemontree Feedlot was flashed across national headlines in March this year when 100 vegan activists stormed and invaded their business and property. The invasion and intimidation by the activists shocked the McNamee family and sent ripples through the agricultural industry. One of our speakers today, David, is manager of Lemontree Feedlot. Lemontree Feedlot is a family-owned and operated enterprise located outside of Millmerran. David himself was born in Brisbane and was raised in Chinchilla. The feedlot is a family affair, having been established by David's father, John McNamee, 20 years ago. David, along with his brothers, James and Ben, continue to manage the feedlot today. Lemontree Feedlot, interestingly, was the first feedlot in Australia to provide grain-fed cattle to Woolworths. Today, it supplies cattle directly to the Kilcoy Meatworks and JBS, as well as offering contract feedlotting. To Rowan, McMonnies, the Managing Director of Australian Eggs. Australian Eggs is the nation's peak industry research body for the egg industry. Much of the work undertaken by Australian Eggs, with Rowan at the helm, is aimed at ensuring egg farmers understand community attitudes and demands. This includes assisting the egg industry in its response to the free-range egg labelling standards. Rowan was born and raised in Northbridge in Sydney, but his self-professed favourite regional town is Grom Grom, a place where his family farmed wheat and sheep for over 80 years. Don't let his commercial mind fool you though. Rowan's background is in law, a fellow legal eagle. As well as his legal background, advising across many different agricultural industries, Rowan has held senior positions with the ACCC. In having both David and Rowan here, it seemed only right to see how they like their steak and eggs. David, I'm told, likes his eggs poached, while Rowan likes his fresh and fried on toast. David likes his steak medium, while Rowan likes his medium rare, with a side of peppercorn gravy, chips and salad. While David and Rowan have different tastes in how they like their steak and eggs, one thing is clear: they like their steak and eggs to come from healthy and happy animals. Without further ado, I'd like to hand over to Craig, David and Rowan.
In the middle, Craig. I'll sit here again. Just to put those on.
Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. A round of applause for Rowan and David, please. And I have already found out that I don't eat anywhere near enough eggs. Although I think per person in Australia right now we eat something like 245 eggs per person per year. Is that right?
247.
247. I'm out by 2. Ladies and gentlemen, this is going to be a thought-provoking discussion this afternoon. There will be time for questions as well, and we'd love to hear those. But I want to start with David's experience on farm early this year. Imagine this. It's a Saturday morning. You've already been out for a couple of hours, moving cattle, for instance, as David was at his place. You come back for a bite of breakfast. Got a cuppa in one hand, and I think, David, you were checking the form guide as well, thinking of maybe placing a sneaky bet later that day.
We actually won a multi.
It was your day.
So you were thinking it was your day until what happened?
Well, we were eating breakfast and I looked up and I saw a procession of cars. There was 35 of them. There was 2 thrifty buses and I knew they were coming for us.
What went through your mind?
a lot of things went through my mind there at that stage, but I knew there that they were activists, and I went to the, I jumped straight in the car, drove around to the front gate to try and block them, but they just inundated the place there. They ran through underneath 2 barbed wire fences and were on the cultivation, running towards the feedlot before we could get anywhere near them.
35 cars, a couple of buses, more than 100 people. What did you do next?
Well, I rang my daughter, and I told her what was going on. She rang the police at that stage, within 2 or 3 minutes there of them arriving. They got to the feedlot very quickly. There we tried, I had men there in vehicles trying to haze them, and thank God no one got run over. They got to the feedlot, and then they proceeded to go in a few different directions into the feedlot.
People everywhere in their white suits and black t-shirt, which is probably an image that's etched in your mind, no doubt.
Yeah, on the t-shirts there was Meet the Victims, but it was MEAT.
How did that make you feel at the time?
Oh, look there, obviously there, I was devastated there when it happened to us, because the beef industry hasn't had this happen to us before. We were dairy farmers at that stage too. I think it was a double whammy there. I think there we're only a couple of hours from Brisbane. It's an easy jaunt there from to come out in a car there and interrupt our business.
What did you say to them?
I asked them a few times there nicely to please leave the property. I think it was over 100 times, and in amongst that 100 times there was a few nasty words said too.
Were they willing to engage? Was there a conversation that had happened? Was it you shouting, your staff shouting at them shouting back at you?
We tried to engage with them there, but they were tunnel vision there. They wanted to have their say and not listen to what we had to say. They were uninvited. We just could not reason with these people.
For the next 90 minutes, because that's around about how long it took for the police to arrive, that 90 minutes probably felt like the longest time of your life too. What did they do?
Well, they got up one of our cattle lanes there, and I'm just so proud there that our men that were on that day there, we marshalled them up one of the cattle lanes so that we could control the group. And then the cattle there, when they were roaring, there they were chanting and carrying on. I had cattle jumping fences, jumping through fences. There our men were terrific in the way that we tried to control them there without any violence. There, we stopped them at 2 or 3 ends there that they could get out, and we tried to marshal them back, towards the dairy.
They had cameras out?
They had cameras all over me. They had 2 drones in the air. All the footage that you have seen all came from their footage. We've got a policy there at the feedlot where our employees there aren't allowed to have phones on them, so they couldn't film back on what these activists were doing either.
How did you get them off the place? How did you get them out of that front gate?
Well, the hardest thing about it was that they, you know, for an hour and 20 minutes, I was called a murderer, a killer, and a rapist. And, you know, that was the hardest part about it, is that, you know, after an hour of that, you start believing you could be a murderer. You know, they had no respect, you know, for us in that situation. We moved them, because we've got a dairy, we artificially inseminate cows, and that's why they were calling us rapists. They called my daughter a lot of terrible names too there, and that's at that stage there where it was starting to get pretty fiery. We got them down, they said we murdered our calves, our bull calves. I said, well, come and have a look there. We've, you know, come down to the calf sheds because it was closer to the road. So we funneled them down towards the calf sheds. I brought them in. I got the three ringleaders and I said, I only want three of you to come in and I'll show you the calves. Which we did have, you know, my daughter wouldn't allow us to euthanize our bull calves. So we reared them all. I said, three of you is there to come in there because of biosecurity, and, you know, our calves there are well looked after, you can come in and see. And then we were inundated with the whole crowd in amongst the calves. So they didn't take much notice of what I've said, for the last hour and 10 minutes. From there, they must have been told, or they had radios on them, that the police were coming. So they were talking amongst themselves, and then they left the place. Only to get outside, where there was another 40 people there with the cars, chanting, you know, their slogans about meeting the killers.
How often are you replaying those events on that day in your mind?
Oh, look, it's still raw after 7 months. After 7 months there, I think it's been. I've been good up until yesterday there when the family spoke about me getting up here and talking to you, Craig. And but the family and staff have still got it raw in their minds. There's always talk about it.
The police took so long to get there, 90 minutes. And I'm trying to give you an idea of what happened for David and his family on that day. I'm sorry to make you relive it as well. But I think it's an important story because this has had such a huge impact on your life and on the broader agricultural community, because it started a much larger discussion as well about animal activism. You're at the heart of it that day. Do you feel, for you, David, and your family, that you would have done anything different?
We talk about that as a family there, whether we did the right thing, you know. I mean, there could have been violence involved. Speaking to a lot of our peers and a lot of producers around the state, you know, I believe we did the right thing by not involving, you know, they were told to leave, you know, a lot of times, and they were trespassing. It had not, you know, it was our family home, it was our business, and you know, it was a great result that we got those people off the place with no one getting hurt. But it could be a different story if it went to someone else.
You don't want this to happen to anybody else. No one else should have to be placed in this situation, full stop. We'll come back to some of the responses that there have been since that day. But Rowan, I want to bring you into the discussion. You're in a very different industry to the lot feeding sector. Australian Eggs, your members have felt the heat and the scrutiny of animal activists for many years. Some would suggest maybe you're on the other side of it. But the experience that David had, what have your members told you about what they've seen happen on their farms?
Sure. Firstly, thanks, David, for telling your story, and I've got no doubt in my mind that you did do the right thing. I think as individuals on the day, and also as a sector broadly, you might put it this way: we're in a bad situation. We get to choose whether we want to make it worse or make it better. And the path that you chose, I think, is quite clearly the right one. In terms of the egg industry's experience, sadly, I think you could describe it as broad and deep. We're a little weathered, if you like, by this issue and this experience, and there's really a couple of decades behind us of experience. I don't think I've ever heard an anecdote in the egg industry of having the scale of that particular activist raid, just having them bust in like that. But there are numerous examples. You know, a couple come to mind quickly. We had a smaller number bust into a large farm, into a grading floor where you have, you know, millions of dollars worth of equipment, and they took to it, busted it up, and that obviously caused the damage to that equipment, but it also it just wrecks the whole supply chain. You've then got your most valuable asset in your flock, and you can't move the eggs, and the flock has to be euthanised. So absolutely devastating for that business. And another quick anecdote of just a more recent one, really. We have a lot of security on egg farms around Australia, and it gets tested from time to time. And you know, a family in Sydney, I just had a casual discussion with him, and he was upset because they'd come in the night and they tried to get in, and he'd had to go down there, and he went with his son, who was 19, and he was hugely affected by that. And his point of view was, I shouldn't have to put my family through that to go and see these people off my farm. So I see a lot of commonality in the experience. I think in terms of the responses, we have had, as a flag, quite a lot more experience, and it's been put to us in a much broader way as well. So it's not that new, and it's not just farm raids. So there's been broader, campaign activity around our industry, as I say, for a couple of decades, and that's primarily around caged eggs and concerns in relation to welfare of hens in cage systems. And that's been complemented by this cycle of activist activity where, you know, you have raids, they get their most valuable asset, which is imagery, through that, and then it becomes part of the campaign activity to use that imagery. From time to time, they will find things that the industry would never want to see, and we know that. We don't have to pretend that's not the case. They'll also regularly find things that are absolutely innocuous and represent it as, you know, the worst thing that they've ever seen. And that has a huge impact on our industry, on our industry's reputation, and on really the public's perception of our industry, which is a very valuable thing. We are simply, like the beef industry, just ingrained in this country. 95% of Australian households have eggs in them. We're obviously a staple food, and they're very much part of the culture of the country as well. Clearly, our reputation and the way in which the public sees us is of critical importance, and this has been a painful couple of decades.
And I think the other good point about that is that we're all in the protein game, and we're all really, really proud of what we do. You know, we supply a terrific product. It's not just locally, into the world.
Rowan, what's driving this rise in activism? I know you've been doing a bit of work in this space. Why is it at the level that we have seen more recently? Why has it got to the level of what we saw on David's farm in March this year?
Well, I've got my theories. I've been watching it pretty carefully, in particular over the last 3 years, and I see two things happening. One is that there is just genuinely increased interest by our broader community in food and where food comes from. And that's not only a theory that most people agree with, but we've sort of taken it to task and proven it scientifically. So that's one dynamic. From there, you've got that curiosity, that interest, and in a way that vulnerability, because most people live in cities and they don't really understand agricultural supply chains, so they don't really understand where their food comes from. You've got an opportunity for activist businesses to get involved and to create messaging and noise and grow their business.
Because I've seen some comments from you previously where you said trespass is effectively the tip of the iceberg, to paraphrase. What do you mean by that?
Well, it's part of the business model in the way that it just frames. So you need to generate that imagery, and when I say imagery, it's not just the picture of the animal, which is always held up as suffering enormously, whether it is or not, but it's the imagery of moving onto the farm. Obviously, they were taking lots of video and taking advantage of social media and creating an impression for their audience, which is ultimately the broader community, and that part of the broader community that's most interested and most concerned and most likely to be sort of sucked into their world and become members and to become funders. That curiosity that something isn't right, that things are going on that they wouldn't approve of. That's the impression they're seeking to create.
So if we talk about responses then, and try to turn this discussion towards solutions and what's going to happen into the future, there was, after what we saw on David's farm, this public outcry. There were changes to state legislation here in Queensland, harsher penalties, tougher penalties. Does that work in your mind? Because you've been looking at some of the psychology here of what's going on for the activist movement, but then also what consumers are expecting. What have you uncovered there?
Well, in terms of trespass as a discrete issue and the response, which has been focused on, mainly on trespass laws and increasing penalties, etc., I think they're sensible and good laws. I think as individuals, including living in the city, the notion that someone can come onto your property anytime they want is ridiculous. And if additional deterrents are required, then there should be additional deterrents. But the issue or the concern, if you like, that I have is that the fundamental issue, the core issue, is much broader than that. And if we think that we can increase deterrence and keep people off David's farm and off farms in this country, then that's unlikely. And we need broader responses, and we need to see the issue, for what it is.
And when you say broader responses, what do you mean by that?
Well, I flagged the challenge. The challenge is that there's a community out there of reasonable-minded Australians who are interested in where their food comes from, and some of them either have generated their own issues or concerns, or they've had issues or concerns put in their mind by campaign activity, as to whether farmers are acting reasonably in the way that they treat animals. And we need to respond to that. And if we don't respond to that productively and allay those concerns, we're going to have more of the business of activism and the fertile ground that makes that business possible and makes it successful. And sadly, as I've flagged, one part of that business is the raids, and so we will have more raids, with or without big fines, because you'll get, I think David mentioned earlier that they look like uni students. I've seen the pictures and I agree. You'll get uni students that might not want to tarnish their reputation or face a criminal prosecution, but for the seriously committed activist, it's an act of martyrdom, isn't it, to go and engage in this activity, and they get in trouble and they become a bigger hero. So you can't actually snub it out entirely, although the laws ought to, and I would hope would be successful in limiting the scope.
Okay, so that's one part, but not maybe solving the cause of the issue that we're seeing at the moment. You're almost talking about trying to take the air out of their argument, full stop. That's an expression of it.
I think whenever someone's disagreeing with you, it's always interesting to reflect on whether they're part right. And when you're dealing with people that are, frankly, if you like, unreasonable, they're stomping all over your farm, it's almost hard to believe that they might be part right. But to the extent that activist animal welfare campaigns are asking the question, are we as a society treating animals appropriately? I can't see how that's not a valid question for our society to ask at any point in time. We've got to answer that question. And if you answer that question effectively, your expression comes into play. You would actually take the air out of the tyres or deflate the issue. You would remove that fertile ground through which they can ply their trade.
Well, it's trying to take the emotion out of it and combat with facts is what you're talking about there, in many ways. David, I'm interested in your thoughts, because when you heard the government looking at tough penalties for people who had been on your farm, for instance, was that the answer you were looking for? What was the answer you wanted to see come out of that experience, that horrendous experience for you and your family?
We wanted a conviction against these people. I couldn't care less how much money they got charged with, what fine they got. A deterrent comes with a conviction. A lot of these kids there, which, whether they're at university or not, you can't go to America with a conviction there put against you. You can't become a lawyer if you've got a conviction against you. I don't know whether that's right, Rowan. There, you haven't got any convictions against you. But,
It's harder to get a job at the ABC.
But I just don't want this happening to another family. There's that many farming families out there, and we're all doing our best. I don't. We are looking after animal welfare the best that we can do, and underneath the standards of what we, are audited under. We're audited, 2 and 3 times a year there. I mean, I'm lucky there I've got a daughter there that can understand the whole lot of it. We need that conviction, as a deterrent. They're crowd funded. We had one girl there on the place there that had been charged 4 times, and the magistrates, one of her fines was $1 fine for trespassing. Now, we'll get the social licence there soon, but we need the community behind us on that as well. That they don't think that's right either.
Well, how do you get the community behind you? Because this is something that Rowan's talking about.
By being transparent in what we're doing, I couldn't care less there if there was a camera up above Lemontree there watching, what we're doing. We're feeding cattle. We're in the midst of the biggest drought in history. We do feed for our own markets. We feed for Swift. We feed for Kilcoy. Both bosses there were one of the first there to ring us and see whether we were all right. We're there. We're not doing anything wrong. We're not ashamed of what we're doing. We need to be proud of what we're doing. And if that, so be it. If they want a camera on top of us, it doesn't worry me in the slightest.
Yeah, you're saying you've got nothing to hide.
No.
Can I just ask, on a personal level on the property, what measures have you taken to try to prevent this from happening again?
Look, there we've got, we put security in. We've got cameras everywhere. I can see what my kids are up to.
Can't even pick your nose on your place.
But there, and everything costs money there, but it can still happen again.
Does that scare you?
Yeah, sure it does. It should, I don't want it happening again. None of the industries want it happening. the majority of them are family farms, you know, with families living on those farms. And, you know, no one wants to be in that situation ever again, you know. They're, you know, when it happened to us, you know, we were thinking, you know, why didn't it happen to the pig industry or the egg industry or the, you know, whatever. Thank God, you know, if it wasn't us, thank God it wasn't us. The spotlight's not on us. But, you know, as a protein industry, we should, I believe we should all be involved in how we do this.
So on that response front, Rowan, because you're talking about building that community trust, effectively that social licence to operate, which is a bit of a buzz phrase, but how do you go about doing that? If that's the answer to deflate the tyres of an activist argument, how do you build that social licence?
It's not particularly easy. Most members of the community are very, very busy people with a lot of issues in their lives. The reason they don't understand agricultural supply chains is because they're busy doing other things. Doesn't mean they don't care. David's point on transparency, I believe, is absolutely bang on, but the challenge is getting their attention in the first place. And I think our community needs to be considered and better understood, and the starting point to do that is to look at it from their perspective rather than ours. So we've got objectives, we'd like to get our message across, but they might not want to receive our message and they might have concerns. And if we're not talking directly to the concerns that they have, they're going to switch off almost immediately. It gets wrapped up in PR and sort of advertising speak.
Well, you've got to answer that question, are they part right? Because that's probably the question that's going through the minds of consumers.
In what way are they part
Well, you
right?
were talking about, you know, activists and their arguments. It makes you question, are they part right?
Well, I only think they're part right to the extent that they ask a valid question. You know, I don't think anyone, including the agriculture sector, can try and shut the gate on consideration of the way in which we treat animals. I mean, it's just an open question for our society at any point in time. But if that's what our community is interested in, the practical issue is how do you get to them? And that's something that Stacey mentioned in the introduction that we've been working on for a couple of years.
Yeah. So what are your answers?
Yeah, well, the most productive thing we've been able to come up with is working with some social science experts at the CSIRO who directed us towards some of the points I just made. It's just saying, well, you've got to look at it from the community's point of view. And you've got to tune into the psychology of the community. You've got to let go of what you want and the message that you want to get across, and you've got to start thinking and talking about what they want. And the practical way of achieving that is through community engagement processes that, to put it in summary form, let the community go first. You go and ask the question, what are you interested in? You know, in relation to us, how do you see us and what are your concerns? Now, by the way, that's a pretty gutsy move. It's pretty novel, really, for most industries and certainly for the agriculture sector. But it has a proven track record. This logic, this discipline, it comes out of other industries, in particular the mining industry, and they've been working with this discipline for sort of 10, 15 years with some success. And I guess we took the gamble that it would be transportable and that it could come across and be effective. And I think you can conclude, even after only 18 months and 2 runs of the process, 2 annual cycles of the process, that it's entirely transferable because it's the same community, it's the same human nature that we're working with.
And what lessons have you taken out of that process? What have you been told through those rounds you talk about?
Well, it kind of changes everything. So you go to the community, you ask them what they think, and you end up, I won't take the time to explain it, but it's a very fancy survey, and it allows you to understand the issues that are most relevant for your industry. And then you commit publicly to engaging on those issues and explaining them. But you also commit to ongoing improvement on those issues. And then, as the world rolls on year after year, because the issue never goes away, you're going to have to demonstrate that improvement over time. Now, what we took from that is it's entirely changed the conversations that we're having internally as an industry. So rather than a circular conversation around the incredible frustration of the process and the attack on the pride of our egg farmers as producers of food for Australians, valid points, by the way, but they don't get us where we need to get to. It moves to, how can we productively change what we're doing in the practical context? We can't upheave the industry. We can't rip out all our infrastructure and just put in new.
We've got to make a quid too.
No doubt. We've got to do it profitably. And that's one of the things that we've done with our process. It's built around a sustainability framework. It's got 4 pillars. One of them is economic viability, because you're not going to see improvement in any system, including agricultural supply chains, if you can't do it profitably.
And who's it up to tell that story in a better way? Is it you as an industry body? Is it farmers themselves to be selling that story to consumers?
Yeah.
Who do you see being the central player in that role?
There's no monopoly, but practically RDCs have the funding to drive that process. But we absolutely bring our farmers into it to be part of telling the story, and we work very closely with our industry representative bodies to make sure that they're part of the process as well. It ain't going to work if we're off on a frolic. It needs to be driven from the ground by farmers that understand the process well and are actually committed to it. Otherwise, we're just heading for a great big cliff. Make a bunch of big promises about how you're going to change and improve, and you're listening, and then don't do anything about it. That's the risk of the process.
Because, David, as you were talking about, you get audited all the time. But what difference does that make to someone walking down the Queen Street Mall? They don't understand that audit process that you have to go through, which is effectively also guaranteeing that supply and the steak that they might be eating for the dinner that night has been farmed ethically with high animal welfare standards. That's what you're committed to, but they don't necessarily know that. How do you see your role then in trying to convince them that is the case? Or do you see that as a role for your industry body?
Just from an advertising point of view there, I've just done 6,500 Ks driving around to see my children there, one in Cloncurry and the other one in Alice Springs. And when you get west of Longreach, I think where Imparja, comes in, the advertising about the bush and about industry in the bush, was unbelievable. Now, I watch the TV. I don't watch, we've got people here, they're on their phones there now, texting and doing all those sorts of things. I'm not tech savvy. I might pinch a look at my wife's Facebook. I'm a troll, I think.
Who's been sending me those nasty?
But we're not doing enough advertising and telling the city what we are up to. That's my general opinion.
Yeah. So that's what you want to see from
I'd love to see.
Body? From who?
From all of industry. Yeah. We've got a great story to tell, and we're telling it to our regional television shows. But we all know that. Why not bring it into the city? To tell that story, and that's where we are getting let down. Is that it's like me talking on the Country Hour. Only country.
It's a great show, though.
Yeah, great show. but only country people can hear it. We're not telling the story to the city.
What are you doing at 5 o'clock tomorrow morning?
I'm not milking cows.
Well, we'll open the floor to questions in just a moment. I just thought I might get a closing point from both of you before we do. Rowan, as people leave this room today, they take on board what you're saying about, yes, it's combating trespass, but then it's also about addressing the cause of the issue, as you describe it. What do you want people to be thinking about as they walk out these doors?
I guess I'd hope that everyone could take on board that there are processes to productively progress these issues. Part of it is to deliver what we call the recipe for success. It's the key drivers of building community trust. And for us, it was that responsiveness that I mentioned, along with the extent to which we regulated and the extent to which the benefits of the egg industry are greater than the costs. And once you've got that recipe, you can work a lot more productively towards your goals. And as a final point, I mentioned this has come from mining into eggs. It's also been taken up by other industries, and I think it has broad application across the sector. and there is a sort of an RDC and NFF, and even I think New South Wales DPI is in it as well, joint project that's recently commenced to pursue this at a cross-sector level. And I'm hoping that firstly it continues to demonstrate benefits, and then it can be picked up more consistently, because my strong view is, and this is what the project will test, is that we impact one another. You know, the community is concerned not about eggs and not about feedlots, they're concerned about animal welfare, and they're going to project that concern into different spaces at different times. So we need to lift our game as a whole sector, I believe, and to ensure that we're engaging with the community as productively as possible.
David, what about from you, the message you'd like people to walk away with today?
I believe there that we should be proud of the industries that we're in, you know, and tell the story. That's really what I want to get across, is that we've got the best grain industry in Australia. We've got the best, you know, all our proteins there that are produced there. You know, I don't think anyone can stand up and say they're better than our industries. But we're just not telling the story. And that's what I want to do, is, you know, get around to that point of telling the story, where their protein comes from. You know, it's a terrific product. And if we don't tell the story, you know, there's plenty of other things there, you know, they can eat.
Ladies and gentlemen, would you please thank David and Rowan for being there.
You've been listening to the Rural Press Club of Queensland's Lunch Series podcast. To book a ticket to our next event, visit our website at ruralpressclub.com.au. Music supplied by audionautics.com.